Ancient Egypt is one of the few places where scholars are able to see men and women being portrayed as equals. But what was the reason for this? The concept of Ma'at focused on the idea of balance, order, harmony, morality, and justice in one's life. If one did anything to interfere with these concepts, it would cause an imbalance and ultimately a failure in maintaining Ma'at. It was crucial to maintain Ma'at if one wanted to live in eternal peace in the afterlife with no consequences. Ma'at was especially crucial for pharaohs to obtain, and one way to do this was by balancing the powers between the male and female. Another reason for this balance in genders was due to the goddess Isis. The goddess Isis was the mother of Horus, who each pharaoh was considered to live through during their rule. Because of this, Isis was seen as the protector of pharaohs, which increased the superior view of women in ancient Egyptian society. With the concept of Ma'at and the goddess Isis, a matriarchal society was inputted in Egypt. The matriarchal system is a form of social organization in which the mother or oldest female is the head of the family, and descent and relationship are reckoned through the female line, and in some cases, the government or rule was by a woman or women. Through this organization, women were given numerous forms of freedom and control. The depiction of women in ancient script and pictures regarding religion, societal roles, and female rulers, we are able to see that the women in ancient Egypt were equals to their male counterparts and the underlying backbone of ancient Egyptian society.
The political aspect of ancient Egypt was extremely progressive, making it unlike any other nation of the time. The female was never seen as inferior to any man. In fact, matriarchy was extremely prominent in regard to Egyptian administration. Women and men had an equal opportunity to reach a status of power, and just like societies in other regions of the world, authority was often given to a person who came from a background of high social status. However, unlike most places, being a male was not a requirement in taking the throne. To add, power was sometimes passed on from maternal descent. Many of the most fascinating female pharaohs of ancient Egyptian history are well known today due to their exemplification of true female power.
Culture for women during the ancient Egypt was very different compared to other countries during this time. Like Brooke mentioned before, women were able to hold positions of power. The first rule for Egypt women were to nurture and care for their children. Along with that, they were able to work, own, and operate a business, inherit property, and even come out in good standing of marriages. Many women in the working class became very wealthy because of this. Countless women were trained in medicine, and some indeed were religious leaders in the priesthood, but they were still not equal to men. When the husbands were out in war, many women were able to take over their businesses and pick up many skills such as needlework, weaving, drawing water, and tending to animals. Some women were able to create furniture and tents. The only thing women couldn't do was join the military. In history, many strong patriarchal societies existed when the sun was worshipped, and in matriarchal societies where the moon was worshipped. In Egypt, both the sun and the moon were worshipped from both societies. This helped them to rise quicker. Worshipping the sun and the moon was a vital part of the religion during ancient Egypt.
Ancient Egypt was a class society that went pharaoh, vizier, noble, priests, scribes, soldiers, craftsmen, farmers, slaves. Women in this time had more freedom and rights than some women have in the modern day. Women in ancient Egypt were responsible for nurturing the young, but also would work in trade, operate and own their own businesses, inherit property, and come out well in divorce. The people of Egypt placed a big emphasis on their gods and religion, but unlike Western cultures, concepts like virginity and divorce were not taken so heavily. In fact, divorce was common, and sex before marriage was socially acceptable. Another amazing thing that they were able to do was be religious leaders. However, to do this, an individual did have to be in the high ranks of the class system, but nonetheless, there was women training to be a part of the priesthood. From a socio-economic level, it seems that women were able to do almost everything that the males could do.
One of the most significant female figures in ancient Egyptian history was Queen Hetepheres I. She's the very first Egyptian queen that historians have memorial on. Queen Hetepheres lived in the 3rd and 4th dynasties and was thought to have carried multiple husbands to the title of king because the throne was passed on directly through her bloodline, making her father the previous ruler. Her first husband was King Sneferu, who was also thought to be Hetepheres' stepbrother. According to the famous Egyptologist Amelia Blandford Edwards, the queen went on to marry Khufu, who might have also been her son. Khufu was most known for his construction of the tallest of the 3 pyramids of Giza. Her last spouse was said to be King Khafra, Khufu's son and therefore possibly her grandchild. He constructed the 2nd pyramid of the 3. Due to these marriages, she is often known as the great favorite of King Sneferu, the great favorite of King Khufu, and the devoted to King Khafra. Hetepheres is pretty much known most definitely for the story of her tomb, which was just discovered in February of 1925. Egyptologist George Andrew Risner was out on the plateau of these pyramids when one of the legs on his tripod directed his attention to an unusual section of plaster. Come to find out, it was the lid to Hetepheres' tomb. A steep passage 99 feet down led to a small room that contained none other than her sarcophagus and belongings, which included her bed, 2 chairs, and some jewelry. 2 years later, when researchers finally opened the sarcophagus, they found it to be empty. However, it is certain that the tomb belongs to Queen Hetepheres because her name is inscribed on the side of it, along with the symbols that represented royalty and divinity. Although there are several theories as to what may have happened to her remains, we may never know exactly why her chest was empty.
Hatshepsut was the 5th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of Egypt, and arguably the greatest of her time. She married to her half-brother, Thutmose II, and raised his son after his sudden death. Her nephew, or stepson, was too young to rule, so she stepped in as regent. However, she was seen more as a co-ruler with greater respect. She first went by just the name Queen, but eventually stepped into the title of first female pharaoh with full power of her position. To Egyptians, a pharaoh is the living embodiment of the male god Horus, and although it was legal for Hatshepsut to rule, it did defy certain principles of Egyptian culture. Hatshepsut knew this was true, and she tried to present herself as a manly figure. In the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, located in western Thebes, pictures of her with a beard and large mantles are on the walls to this day. She also argued her legitimacy to the title, claiming that her father appointed her his successor. The question of whether or not she should have ruled in the first place does not discredit her achievements in 21 years of a strong and rising kingdom in Egypt. Hieroglyphics that have recently been decrypted tell of her accomplishments, like trading expeditions she authorized brought riches such as ivory and gold to the world. She had strong religious connections with the people and commissioned hundreds of building projects that greatly advanced architecture in Egypt, and claims to have had a successful military career. Hatshepsut's rule threatened the tradition of male rulers in the end. Despite her dedication to upholding the beliefs of her people, it wasn't enough. Her stepson, Thutmose II, had almost all evidence of her rule destroyed, possibly out of jealousy. However, thanks to the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, her legacy and remarkable rule do not go unnoticed.
The desert, my reason for continuing to breathe. There is not a single pussycat in all of Egypt that you like. What can I do?
Sing me a little songy, Sing!
Who's afraid of Cleopatra, Cleopatra, Cleopatra? Who's afraid of Cleopatra, tra-la-la-la-la?
Cleopatra was the most well-known queen. She was the last ruler of Egypt. She was very intelligent and spoke several languages. She had also studied astronomy before becoming queen. She became queen at the age of 17, where she married her younger brother Ptolemy, the 13th of Egypt, who was only 12 years old. Their marriage didn't last long. Cleopatra discharged him from the official documents, making herself sole ruler. Over the years, she fought with Ptolemy. Ptolemy became very jealous of Cleopatra and how much the kingdom loved her. He became so obsessive with her power that he ordered her killed by 2 court officials to help him. Cleopatra had sought the help of Julius Caesar. She smuggled herself into the palace by carpet, and eventually Caesar became so in love with her that he became her lover. Her relationship strained with Caesar, and she bore his child, Caesarion. She married her other brother Ptolemy the 14th, but still kept Caesar as her lover. Caesar later is killed by Senate members, while Cleopatra is in Rome. When she returns, she gets startled by the news of his death and kills her brother. Caesarion becomes king at the age of 4. In 41 BC, she meets Mark Antony and made it her goal to make him fall in love with her. Later, she bores his twins, and later, after his divorce with Octavia, they have their 3rd child. By 31 BC, the Battle of Actium began, and by 30 BC, Antony had been defeated. Soon after, Antony committed suicide. When Cleopatra received these news, she was destroyed, so she too committed suicide by a cobra snake bite. She was the last of the powerful women in Egypt, and after her death, Egypt fell into Rome's hands.
Nefertiti means the beautiful one has come. During the 14th century BC, Nefertiti was the queen of Egypt and wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten. Nefertiti and her husband created their own religion, the cult of Aten, which established the sun god as the only significant god. They moved the capital city to Akhenaten to honor their god. Nefertiti had more power than previous queens and was depicted in artifacts with the crown of a pharaoh. She elevated to a higher position and was seen as a co-regent with her husband. No other queen was shown as often with her husband on statues as Nefertiti. Although they were often illustrated as a pair, Nefertiti was still portrayed as an independent from her husband. For example, she was shown making offerings to Aten by herself, and ordinary people could address prayers directly towards her. Nefertiti filled the vacancy left when the earlier goddesses were outlawed. Nefertiti is an example of the amount of authority and respect a woman was able to obtain in ancient Egypt.
Nefertari Merit-Mut, meaning the beautiful companion, beloved of Mut, was the most beloved, beautiful, and first queen and wife to Ramses II during the 19th century. She married at the age of 13 to a 15-year-old Ramses before he rose to the throne and stood by him till her death. I'll talk about a ride-or-die love story. Nefertari was the most likely a noblewoman and not of royal family, as records show her using titles related to a noblewoman rather than a king's daughter. Yet with time, designations like Sweet Love, Bride of God, and Lady of the Two Lands were being granted upon her, which describes her positions as a lover, priestess, and a political figure, which was a great honor for a woman at the time compared to other societies during this time. Nefertari was not only beautiful, but she was an esteemed scholar as well, as she could read and write hieroglyphics. She would write letters to the king and queen of Hittites, usually just the queen, and sent gifts often like a gold necklace for the queen and colored linen for the king, saying in the letter, "For your neck, a necklace of pure gold, and colored linen to make a royal robe for your husband, the king." She would compose her letter in the Egyptian language and then have a bilingual scribe translate it for her before she would send it. Images and statues of Nefertari have been found throughout Egypt which depict how important she was to Ramses. Queen Nefertari's tomb was one of the most beautiful tombs in all of Egypt. It was built by Ramses II, or Ramses the Great. Ramses wanted to dedicate one of the most beautiful tombs to his most beautiful wife, Queen Nefertari. You could find her tomb in the Valley of Queens, and with all these images and statues, they portrayed a very powerful queen, and with having her image next to the gods of education and wisdom, love, and it just shows how much power she held upon Ramses and her Egyptian society. Nefertari, being an esteemed scholar, lover, political figure, and bride of God, shows the power and capability of women in Egyptian society and her importance more than just her direct area, but also in the capital of Hittites, showed that she was more than just a birth giver and a beautiful woman, and that she did a lot to improve her nation.
The Egyptian people were way ahead of their time in regards to the power and respect they gave women in society. Through the accomplishments of the female pharaohs in ancient Egypt, they were able to sculpt a path for the rest of the world to follow and progress towards.